Chapter 12. Last Rites. Ben looks down at the body in the car. It's not the first time he's seen a corpse. He sees them all the time in his line of work. Granted, those bodies have usually belonged to animals, but the principle remains the same. At one point there was a consciousness behind the meat, now all that remains is the meat. It happens to everyone and everything. Tragic? Sure. Devastating? Scary? No and no. After 20 minutes of debating over what to do with the body, they finally decide to simply dump it in the woods for now. Ben suggests the gully where Larry met the Dryad. There are at least 2 officers on the perimeter at any given time, so the chances of any civilians stumbling upon it are slim. And even if someone were able to get past the guards, they'd find themselves confronted with something far more interesting than a dead body. Chances are the body would be consumed as soon as they brought it to the Dryad's domain anyway, and that would be just fine for their purposes. They climb into Larry's car. Ben retrieves a beach towel from his own trunk and drapes it over the blood-stained seat before getting in, and they start driving. Larry fidgets as he drives, and jerks the steering wheel more than once, nearly causing Ben to crack his head open on the window. "You want me to drive?" Larry shakes his head, almost colliding with a truck on the other side of the road in the process. "No, I'm fine." "If you say so." They make it about halfway up the road to the gully before Larry speaks up. "I just don't know how to feel about it." "Feel about what?" "About feeding her that thing down in the forest." "It's not a her anymore," says Ben. "Whoever that used to be, she was long gone before you ever saw her. Even more so now." "That doesn't make me feel any better." Ben is suddenly struck by the realization that Larry has just killed a person. Probably for the first time in his life. And it wasn't some criminal or thug in the line of duty. It was someone he had been trying to help. Just some lost kid in the woods who'd needed a ride home. Ben thinks about the raccoon from the day before. And those twisted, apocalyptic dreams he's been having, and the haunting presence of that singing worm that never seems to leave the back of his mind anymore. He's been getting so consumed by his own personal slice of the nightmare cake, the fact that people are literally getting torn to shreds hasn't quite sunken in. He looks at Larry, trying to read the expression on the man's face. He seems to be concentrating on driving. Ben returns his own gaze to the road ahead and breathes, absorbing the silence for a moment. Larry turns onto a side street, hoping to find a more secluded path into the woodland. They find a place where there are no houses, where the asphalt has lain unmanaged for so long that tall grass sprouts up from its many cracks, and its craters' potholes have devolved into little mossy pools, probably brimming with myriad tiny forms of life. He carefully navigates the uneven terrain until he finds a relatively flat place to park. He allows the car to slowly roll into position and stops, turning off the engine and leaning back to stare at nothing in particular. Before the peace becomes too unbearable, Ben clears his throat. "It'll be dark soon." "I'm looking forward to it," Larry says without moving his eyes. "You can't see all the horrors in the dark." Ben sighs. "I assume you're waxing metaphorical, 'cause I don't want to be caught within a mile of this place after sundown." Larry doesn't respond. Ben unbuckles his seatbelt and opens the passenger door, jerking his hand back as his finger brushes up against something soft and moist under the handle. He wipes the unseen slime on his pant leg without looking and swings the car door open. "Come on, Palladino," he says. "We can commiserate when the party's over." Larry grunts and climbs out of the driver's side. He glances around absently at the surroundings. Ben realizes that he's deflecting, or whatever it's called. He's not a psychologist. Browsing his environment, not really paying attention to anything in particular, because there's something specific that he doesn't want to engage with, consciously or not. Ben decides to let the sleeping dog lie for the moment. He walks around the car and opens the rear driver's side door nearest the woods. It looks like Larry did a good job of destroying whatever pod-person remote control tumor was crammed inside the woman's neck. It's the first time he's seen a dead or dying specimen that isn't swarming with those writhing little tentacles. It's odd, but not perplexing. There's no way even a superpower like the Carpentary would work perfectly 100% of the time. He turns to see that Larry's been watching him with some scrutiny. He seems to have regained his composure. "Find anything interesting?" "Besides the remains of a zombie parasite you sent to hell? Not much." "I'm not sure how I feel about that word." "What, hell?" "Zombie." Larry steps up next to Ben and looks down at the body in the car. "Feels inappropriate." She didn't seem like a zombie to you? Larry shakes his head. No, she did. It was like she was unfamiliar. Like she'd never been a person before. Like a child? Sort of, but not really. It wasn't like she was new to everything, just like... He scratches his chin. Oh, you know what she reminded me of? It's weird, but it's like she was a tourist. A tourist? Yeah, I don't know how else to put it. She just seemed like a tourist. An evil, flesh-eating tourist, but a tourist. Something about that idea rings a bell in the back of Ben's mind, but he ignores it. A tourist, he repeats. Larry checks his watch and surveys the slowly reddening sky. We better get this done, he says. Wait till the party's over, like you said. Ben agrees and begins to help drag the body from the car. He lifts the legs while Larry takes the shoulders. Feeling the weight of this vessel that had once contained a person who had walked and talked, dreamed and feared, maybe drank coffee in the mornings and a glass of wine some evenings. A person who probably held strong opinions about things she rarely ever talked about, could never seem to remember the name of that really good movie she saw that one time in high school. A person who did all the stuff people do. His throat feels knotted. As they carefully carry the blanket-wrapped body down the uneven wooded hill into the gully, he's struck by a sudden, overwhelming feeling that he needs to know the identity of this woman. That since he was one of the only people in the world to know her fate, he has a responsibility to her memory. His mind whirls for a moment, imagining this bizarre, made-for-TV movie about how a wacky mishap with a dead body led him to learning a little something about life, love, and the human spirit. He laughs to himself. He laughs out loud while carrying a body into the woods out of pure camaraderie with a man he barely knew a month ago. He wonders if the evil-smelling vapor that comes from Corpomolta Carpentieri's brown sludge might have intoxicating effects when inhaled. Larry meets his eyes, but doesn't say anything. They carry the body to the bottom of the gully where they lay her in the grass to decide which direction to take. Bringing her to the Dryad seems like the most logical course of action, but Larry has some reservations. He's seen 2 of his fellow officers torn to shreds by the creature before his very eyes, after all. Under his own command, no less. Ben takes the initiative and picks the body back up by the shoulders. He knows the town's woodlands like the back of his hand, and leads the way along the stream to the place where the Dryad sings. The melody is deeper and more harmonious than before. It permeates the very wood of the trees around them, creeping under the skin and burrowing into the bones. Ben finds himself being drawn towards the melody, like Odysseus to the sirens on the rocks. He wonders how many stray animals have wandered like this, mesmerized into the open tendrils of the monster in the tree. How many of those empty eyes has the Dryad collected by now? They continue cautiously up the hill toward the melody. When they're within eyeshot of the creature, the twisted tune begins to change, almost as if excited for this tasty morsel they're bringing to its doorstep. They gently lay the body on the ground. The eerie, lidless eyes follow their movement. The great black pupils dart up from the body and fix themselves directly on Ben. The maddening melodies begin creeping under his skin. Hollow, gaping orifices open wide all over the Dryad, vibrating gently as the song passes over their lips. Ben has the decidedly disgusting urge to crawl inside them, down into the moist darkness of the Dryad's guts, into the oneness. He shakes the feeling, but still finds himself slowly stepping toward the monstrosity. It seems to smile sweetly at him with its twisted lack of faces. Larry grabs his shoulder before he takes the second step. "The hell are you doing?" Ben looks at him and blinks. I don't know. He looks back at the Dryad. "I think it's safe." Larry keeps his hand on Ben's shoulder, a worried look pulling at the corners of his eyes. Ben glances down at the woman's corpse at their feet, remembering the horrific scene he saw in the body cam video, the carnage that Larry had witnessed with his own 2 eyes. He looks back at the beckoning Dryad and shudders. "Come on," says Larry. "Party's over." Ben turns away from the fleshened tree and follows his friend back down the path.